Welcome to On The Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC 322, which goes down this weekend at the MSG Madison Square Garden in New York. You know it's going to be a phenomenal card when a card is placed at the famous MSG in New York. We're coming off two back-to-back Apex events, so we're finally in an arena. But to be fair, those Apex events have absolutely delivered over, the last couple of weeks. We had a phenomenal fight card with a ton of finishers last weekend. We had finishers the weekend before, a lot of controversy as well, referee controversy, and then obviously the potential fight fixing controversy, which the FBI are now investigating, which is absolutely fantastic news. And then after those 2 weeks at the Apex, full of action, we're over at the MSG in New York, and man, this is a phenomenal fight card. We've got 14 fights from top to bottom, amazing fights at the top of the card, the main and the co-main events. There's two title fights, which interestingly, I'm not sure if this has happened before, but there's two title fights where the challenger is a vacated champion from the division below, that they've vacated the belt to move up in weight to challenge for the title in the weight division above them. So, like I say, obviously that's happened before, but I can't ever remember a main and a co-main event, two title fights where the challenger has vacated their belt, winning fight after fight, defending the belt fight after fight, and just thinking, well, look, I want a new challenge. I want to step up in weight. I want to vacate my title and fight for the belt in the division above. So, yeah, super interesting card, especially in that main and co-main event, because, again, so many other aspects take place when a fighter moves up in weight, but especially when a fighter moves up in weight and then that first fight up a weight class is against the current champion in the weight division above. So yeah, absolutely, definitely cannot wait to discuss that and break these fights down, and we're going to get there in just one moment. But of course, just before we get into those breakdowns, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend from a betting perspective, which if you are listening to this betting related podcast, I'm sure you're going to be interested in getting in on the action, playing this weekend against the bookies to try and win some money, make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a long-term gambler, whether you're a gambler that, likes to make your own decisions, but also likes reasoning behind certain picks, predictions, and bets. Recommended bets, we've got a recommended bet section for you with full written breakdowns, reasoning and justification for the reasons why we're recommending those plays. We've got an official bet section, so if you absolutely want to do nothing at all and just want to tail a professional handicapper, which is myself, we've got an official bet section which just details the exact bets and the stake and the odds and the bookies of where that's been played by myself, the professional handicapper. That's where my money has gone, and that section is for those guys that just want to tail and just bet exactly what I bet on. We've also got a fun gamblers section, so if you're one of those fun gamblers that like the long shot parlays, bet a little less, try to win a little more, then we've got that section for you. We've got pre-built parlays, we've got a parlay option section so you can build your own. We've got absolutely everything that you need in that section. Then, of course, with every betting subscription comes Base AI, our UFC prediction software that's been on an absolute heater all year. And that comes with everything from the professional handicapper side as well. We don't split those two services. That's all included. All you've got to do is just decide whether you want to pay for a single event, monthly, or annually. It's $5 for one event, $10 a month, or $99 for an entire 12 months of betting predictions. And just to be clear, Base AI gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome, for every UFC fight, for every UFC event. And that's all at MMAplay365.com. And with the introduction out the way, with the promo out of the way, let's get down to breaking some fights down. And we start, of course, as always, in the main event for the UFC Welterweight Championship. We've got Della Maddalena versus Islam Makhachev. Now, Della Maddalena is the fighter that is the current champion. And look, fair play to Della Maddalena. I had Belal Muhammad beating him. I thought Belal Muhammad was going to be a nightmare matchup for him, considering Della Maddalena had issues with, sort of fighters taking him down in the past and making things razor close because of that. I thought Belal Muhammad was a fighter with that wrestling and grappling style that could and should have probably smothered Jack Della Maddalena. But fair play to Jack, he defended the takedowns when he needed to. He caused problems for Belal Muhammad. He pieced him up, picked him apart, and it was a decisive win for him. And look, I'm not surprised that he was the champion, but or he became the champion, and I'm not surprised he beat Belal Muhammad. What I'm surprised about is how much development within that wrestling and defensive grappling areas that Maddalena had actually improved in. Now, he's going to have a massive test on his hands here because Islam Makhachev, as I mentioned in the introduction, the former UFC lightweight champion, never got beaten, from that belt perspective. He vacated the title, he's moved up in weight. And I do think it was only a matter of time before Makhachev did that anyway. You could tell he was very big for lightweight, and I'm going to be very interested to how big he looks at welterweight. I don't think this is a lightweight that's going to come up and look undersized. I think the opposite, actually. I think Makhachev was absolutely huge for lightweight and will come in with a bigger frame and be big for this division as well. I genuinely think he's going to have a legitimate weight cut. In regards to how much weight he's actually cutting, I think when they both step inside the cage, it wouldn't shock me if Makhachev was heavier than Jack Della Maddalena as well. So I'm not putting too much factor into that move up in weight because I think Makhachev's going to perform at welterweight and be as big at welterweight as what he was at lightweight compared to his lightweight opponents. So yeah, for me, look, Makhachev, the move up in weight is perfect. I think the timing's right on it as well. Now, Makhachev's always going to have the doubters on him. For me, I feel like he's the best pound for pound fighter in the world, from an MMA perspective. Now, obviously, Ilia Topuria is actually the number one ranked pound for pound. Makhachev moving up in weight. I don't know if that's caused an issue on the pound for pound. I know he used to be, but pound for pound, when you actually break that down, that's the hardest fighter to beat in the division that they're in. And that's how pound for pound works. And I think Islam Makhachev is harder to beat at lightweight and welterweight than what Ilia Topuria is. Now, that's going to come with some controversy, I would imagine. There's going to be some people that disagree with that. But I just think Makhachev is less beatable than Ilia Topuria. And for me, that's why Islam Makhachev is the number one pound for pound fighter in the world, again, in my opinion. But just like Khabib Nurmagomedov, who Makhachev is probably the closest to Khabib that there's ever been to Khabib in regards to style, the quality of the skill set as well. Khabib always had people betting against him, always. And look, I'm going to be totally honest. I had a bet on Arman Tsarukyan against Islam Makhachev. Now, I wasn't confident that Arman Tsarukyan was going to beat Makhachev, but Arman Tsarukyan, again, is probably the closest to Makhachev in regards to the style. And look, to beat Makhachev, you've got to be able to compete with him wrestling and grappling. And for me, Arman Tsarukyan was the most competitive, or would have been the most competitive opponent from that wrestling and grappling perspective. And I was getting, plus 350 on an Arman Tsarukyan. Look, like I say, I think Islam Makhachev would have won that fight, but, from a betting perspective, I liked Arman Tsarukyan. We're in the business of making good bets, not picking winners. And like I say, I had the bet on Arman Tsarukyan, but he was plus 350. If he'd been plus 200, I wouldn't have bothered, So, look, from that side, yes, I had a bet against Makhachev, but that doesn't mean that I think anything less of Makhachev. It was simply just making a good bet that I felt held value. Now, this is a completely different style of fight with Jack Della Maddalena. He's predominantly a striker, and I just think that Della Maddalena, it's so unfortunate for how it's played out for him, in my opinion. And I know we haven't seen this fight yet, but based on how I think this fight is going to play out, this is a guy that's made his way up to a title fight. Maybe got the title a little bit sooner than what a lot of people thought. But then in his first defense of the title, he's now facing Islam Makhachev that's coming up in weight. I just feel that's super unfortunate because there's probably other opponents in this division that Jack Della Maddalena could have, gone up against and beaten and had a little bit of a reign as a champion. But, spoiler alert, I don't think that reign is gonna happen at this point because of the opponent he's facing. Islam Makhachev, for me, Look, I know Jack Della Maddalena had some improvements from a defensive perspective, wrestling and grappling against Belal Muhammad, but Islam Makhachev is levels above Belal Muhammad from that wrestling and grappling perspective. I just don't think there's anybody better, at least in this division. So I do think Jack Della Maddalena is going to get taken down. I do think he's going to have problems on his back. Yes, he's got a chance of, hitting Makhachev and doing some good sharp work on the feet with the boxing, but I just don't think it's going to be enough. And people will say, oh, well, Dustin Poirier had some success against Makhachev, and yes, he did. You're right. It was a closer fight than I think a lot of people predicted. But guess what? Makhachev still subbed him and still won the fight by finish. And then some will say, okay, well, Alexander Volkanovski pushed him in that fight where it was razor close, and yes, he did. He did push Islam Makhachev, and it was closer than, again, a lot of people in the betting markets anticipated. But guess what? Makhachev still won, and then he went on and knocked him out in the first round in a rematch afterwards. So, for me, yes, Jack Della Maddalena can have some success here. Every fight starts standing, and because of that, he's got opportunities to be landing on Makhachev, but I just don't see a scenario where Makhachev either A, can't take him down, or B, Makhachev just stays striking and allows himself to get pieced up. Makhachev's still not a bad striker himself. Yes, for me, Maddalena, if this is a 25-minute kickboxing fight with no wrestling or grappling, then yeah, Maddalena does have a very good chance of beating Makhachev, and probably does, but the fact is, this is MMA. I do think Makhachev's going to get takedowns. I do think he's going to be a problem for Jack Della Maddalena. And whilst we're mentioning previous fights, let's not forget that Makhachev took down Charles Oliveira and subbed him. Like pretty soon after he took him down in round 2, he subbed him. That's Charles Do Bronx Oliveira that Makhachev took down and subbed. Like, that is the level of what we're dealing with on the mat from a grappling perspective. So the question is, does Islam Makhachev take Jack Della Maddalena down? Yes, I think he does. Does he take him down when he wants to take him down? Yes, I think he does. And then does Jack Della Maddalena, do good work in trying to get back up to his feet? I'll never say he can't get back up. I never like to do that. But for me, I like the fighter that took down Charles Oliveira and subbed him in this fight against a predominant striker, a boxing heavy striker as well. So for me, I think it's a tough mountain to climb for Jack Della Maddalena. I think Islam Makhachev is the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. I think he proves it on Saturday night. I think he takes Jack Della Maddalena down, and I think he does good work on top of him and gets the finish with that as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Islam Makhachev to win this fight and become the new UFC welterweight champion. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got the UFC Women's Flyweight Championship on the line. We've got Valentina Shevchenko versus Zhang Weili. Again, as I mentioned in the introduction, it's Zhang Weili that's stepping up a weight class. She's vacated her belt. She was dominant in the strawweight division. She's stepping up in weight now. She's vacated that belt, and now she's fighting the champion Valentina Shevchenko. It couldn't be any other fight. It just had to be this fight. So it definitely makes sense that we've got Zhang Weili stepping up in weight, and then the first fight is for the title against Valentina Shevchenko. And it's a really interesting fight. Now, from a betting perspective, I'm actually quite surprised with how the lines move. Now, before I get into that, just for those people that maybe haven't followed me as long, or as maybe I've not mentioned this before and you don't know, but I kind of do all my research, my tape study, and everything that goes into, deciding from a betting perspective where I'm going to be at for an event the week before that event. So I always keep myself a week in front, and I do that for a number of reasons. The first reason is so I'm not scrambling on fight week for that specific event. On fight week, I'm looking at the next card the following week. I just like to keep myself a week in advance. I've always been like that. Another reason is it helps these podcasts get out early, so I can wake up on a Monday morning and record a podcast knowing that I've done all my research and my analysis. And then the third reason why is from Base AI's perspective. Now, our AI team generates the predictions for Base AI on fight week, so being a week in front and a week in advance, there's absolutely no influence on my picks and predictions and my bets because of the AI predictions. And, that's the whole point of us having two different sort of aspects on MMA Play 365 from Base AI and a handicapper prediction because, again, there's no influence, and sometimes there is a lot of clashes where I disagree with the AI, and I would never be influenced anyway, but it just eradicates any potential opportunities of an influence. So anyway, I do all my research, my analysis a week in advance. So at the end of last week, I was looking at this betting line, and it was pretty much a dead even pick'em. There were some bookies that had Valentina Shevchenko the slight favourite. There was some bookies that had Zhang Weili the slight favourite. There were some bookies that were a dead even -110, -115 pick'em across the board. So it was very much like there was a lot of indecisive numbers from what I was looking at, over a number of different bookies. Now, waking up this morning, I've checked the betting line, and there's been money pumping in on Valentina Shevchenko to the point where Weili Zhang has officially got a plus number next to her betting line. Now, I thought that was going to go the opposite way. I was expecting to wake up this morning and it be Shevchenko that's got the plus money on the betting line across the board. Now, that's not me saying, okay, well, I think, Zhang Weili is going to smash Shevchenko. That's just me putting sort of my betting market hat on and thinking where people are going to be putting the money on. I definitely thought Zhang Weili would be more popular to bet on than what Shevchenko would be. And that's due to Zhang Weili just being completely dominant and well-rounded in everything that she does as well. Now, what's very strange between both of these fighters is they're very similar in age. I think Zhang Weili is only a year younger. I think that Zhang Weili has got either one fight less or one fight more. It's one fight less experience than Shevchenko, actually, thinking about it. So Zhang Weili is actually only a year younger. So the age is pretty much the same. The experience is pretty much the same. But for some reason, it just feels like Zhang Weili is the fresher fighter. And normally when both fighters are a similar age, you're saying, well, there's less miles on the clock in this fighter. But like I say, they've both got a similar amount of fights in the professional career. So even the miles on the clock doesn't really make sense in saying that. But it just feels that Zhang Weili's got more youthful energy about her. She's a fighter that, is absolutely in a prime now. Whereas I don't think that Shevchenko is in the prime right now. She's not declining or anything. She's a champion for a reason. There's no UFC champion that's on a decline. But I just think the better version of Shevchenko was maybe a couple of years ago. Whereas I think the best version of Weili Zhang is right now. So that's what, again, just that was my thoughts and kind of how I was thinking the betting line was going to move because of that. Now, how they actually match up, like, it is very even. Like, Shevchenko, you have to say, is the better striker from a technical perspective. She's the one with the Muay Thai background, the years of Muay Thai. So even though Zhang Weili will absolutely be competitive from a striking perspective, you can't say that she's more technical than Shevchenko. But when it comes to a wrestling and grappling side, now, the actual betting numbers, when you look at the statistics, do show you that Shevchenko is probably the better wrestler in regards to, the takedown numbers, the completion rate, the takedown defense percentage as well. But I do feel that those numbers are somewhat misleading because you look at Shevchenko and how many wrestlers she's fought. Well, in the last sort of like 5 years and over X amount of fights, like almost 10 fights, like, she hasn't fought anybody that's really predominantly a wrestler. Whereas you look at Weili Zhang, you just have to go back to her last fight and look who she fought there. She fought Tatiana Suarez, who is a wrestling and grappling beast. Before Zhang, Suarez was taking out absolutely everybody, hammering them and dominating them from a wrestling and grappling perspective. And she came in against Zhang Weili. Yes, Tatiana Suarez had a good first round in regards to top side, but then after that, Zhang was defending the takedown. Zhang was doing good work on top of Tatiana Suarez. And for me, that shows more from a wrestling perspective in one fight than it does from Shevchenko's last X amount of fights. And then grappling wise, I think Weili Zhang's better from a grappling perspective. I'm not sure that's even really a debate, if I'm being honest. Again, not like a million miles apart. A bit like how the striking is. Shevchenko's the slightly better striker. Zhang's competitive, but Shevchenko's still the better striker. I think the same with the grappling. It's competitive, but Zhang's the slightly better grappler. And then from a wrestling side, I do think that Zhang Weili is the better wrestler. Now, again, from a moving up in weight perspective, one thing that is going to be really interesting is how big is Zhang Weili actually going to be on the scales? So like I said with Islam Makhachev, I think he's going to be, a very big welterweight, and I think he's going to, I don't know whether it'll surprise people or not. I genuinely think he's going to be perfect for the weight class. Whereas with Zhang Weili, I'm just not as sure. I think she'll be fine. I'm assuming she's going to be fine. She was never a small strawweight. She was always very physical and strong. So I do think that's going to be a good stand-in for her in this division. But I'm just a little bit less sure than what I am about Islam Makhachev regarding the weight. But regardless of all of that, like, I genuinely think this is going to be a true mixed martial arts fight. We're going to have rounds won because of the striking, rounds won and lost because of the striking. We're going to have rounds won and lost because of the wrestling and grappling. I think we're going to see a mixture of everything in pretty much every round. I think we're probably going to see both fighters taken down. I think we're going to see both fighters have some time topside. I think we're going to see both fighters landing good volume and good strikes on each other as well. I think it's going to be a war. I genuinely think it's going to be a war. Maybe similar to the famous Weili Zhang and Joanna Jędrzejczyk type of fight. I genuinely feel like we're going to see both of these ladies just go at it. And I think it's going to be a very, very good fight. And because it's going to be so close and competitive, again, I always side on a fight that's close and competitive. I'll always side from a pick and prediction perspective at the very least with the underdog. But I actually think that Zhang Weili could probably be the slight favourite here and not look out of place. So yeah, look, this type of fight, I do think that if anyone is gonna slowly pull away with the fight, I do like the work of Zhang Weili. I think, like I've said already, I think she looks the fresher fighter. I think she's got more of the youthful energy. I think she's more in a prime than what Valentina Shevchenko is. Shevchenko, she has had moments where she's not looked that there was a time in her career where you just couldn't see her losing. But then there's been moments where, she can be got at. You're starting to see slight holes. And I think somebody as elite and as well-rounded as Weili Zhang, I think Weili Zhang's a better put-together fighter than Alexa Grasso, who, I know Grasso didn't cause her too many problems in that last fight, but the two before that absolutely caused her problems and took the belt from her as well and submitted her. I think Weili Zhang is more well put together than Alexa Grasso from both an all-rounded perspective and a skill set and strength perspective as well, and also defensively. So for those reasons, I'm picking Weili Zhang to win this fight and become the new UFC women's flyweight champion. And in the next fight, this is a really interesting fight. We've got Leon Edwards versus Carlos Prates. Now, Carlos Prates is a fighter that, for me, I still think he's going to be climbing in the division. I still think he's a fighter that is going to be around at the top for a while. Now, Leon Edwards on the other side, again, he's a fighter that I think people are seeing as, declining. He's a plus 170 underdog in this fight, which I do think is very representative of how people see Leon Edwards. And look, people and the betting market and fans have just not liked Edwards throughout his entire UFC career, which I think is crazy because he's a super talented fighter, extremely well-rounded. He's a former UFC champion as well. So I just don't get it, if I'm being honest. Now, I do appreciate that he's probably not the fighter he was when he was, beating Kamaru Usman back-to-back, knocking Usman out and then beating him over a decision therefore after. And Usman was one of the best fighters, one of the best welterweights that has been in the UFC, of all time. So I don't think that version of Leon Edwards is quite there now, but I'm also not totally convinced that the decline is so massive that he can't beat Carlos Prates, who, by the way, when Prates had his big step up in competition against Ian Gary, look at how that went. Prates just wasn't on that level. And I know he finished the fight strong, but for the most part, Ian Gary absolutely, put a clinic on him. And Leon Edwards isn't a million miles away from the same quality and, the style of fight that Ian Gary fights as well. So I think this fight's a lot closer than what a lot of people anticipate. And look, I know Carlos Prates, came back after that Ian Gary fight and, had a good performance against Jeff Neal, but I still think there's a difference in level between Jeff Neal and an Ian Gary and a Leon Edwards. So for me, this is, again, another Ian Gary test. And does Carlos Prates passed the test. Now, there's certain things that I also don't like about Prates. I don't like the fact that he's a smoker. In a 3-round fight, probably gets away with it, but I genuinely think that he wasn't confident he had 5 rounds of gas when he fought Ian Garrett, and maybe the smoking comes down to that. Like, I know people will say, okay, well, he's got to this stage in his career, he's got this far whilst being a smoker, so surely it doesn't affect him that much. Well, I'm gonna like the cardio, the pace, and being able to fight over 5 rounds more for a non-smoker than I am a smoker. So there's certain things I don't like about Prates, but from a skill set perspective, he's a very creative striker, he's a dangerous striker, and he's a very, very good fighter. He's a world-class fighter at where he is in the UFC. Now, the thing that I like about Leon Edwards is it appears that he's made some really important changes. I believe that he's with a new gym, or at least he's got another coach or two added to his team, and I like these types of changes where something's not quite working out, so you're changing things up, you're looking at how to not only extend your career, but get that confidence back in your performance and just reignite yourself overall. So I like the changes that Leon Edwards has made as well. I think we're going to see a better version of Edwards than what we did in the last couple of previous fights. But again, you go back to those losses. Sean Brady, who we'll talk about in a couple of fights on this podcast, Sean Brady is an absolute monster. What he did to Leon Edwards, he's going to do to a lot of people. And Brady, again, is a fighter in his prime that's just very, very difficult to beat, who's also developing from fight to fight as well. And then the fight before that was Belal Muhammad for the title. And again, didn't kind of work out for Leon Edwards on the night. But again, Belal Muhammad was a UFC champion because of that fight. So the fighters that Leon Edwards is losing against are the fighters either competing for the title or at the very, very top of the division. And admittedly, Carlos Prates isn't a million miles off for being at that top of the division, but the last time we saw Prates take a real step up in competition, he got outclassed because of that. And I'm kind of leaning this way for Edwards. Like, maybe it's one last roll of the dice on Edwards at this level in the UFC. There is a chance that, that I could be wrong. I'm not always going to be right. And maybe Edwards just is at a certain level now. He won his title, he reached the pinnacle of his career, and just like any fighter in this division, the older you get, the more your age, the more you start to slowly slip away from your prime years and your prime qualities. Maybe this is Leon Edwards' time for that. But until I see a definite case of that against a lower level competition than the fighters he has been losing against, which Prates is lower level than Sean Brady and Belal Muhammad right now, I'm not gonna go down that route until I'm 100% sure of it. And I do think that Leon Edwards has still got quality in him. I do think he's still got a very high skill set. I do like the moves he's making in regards to the personnel that he's adding to his team. And like I say, Carlos Prates fell short the last time he fought another fighter at this level of this same type of style as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Leon Edwards to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Beneil Dariush versus Benoit Saint-Denis. Now, I like Beneil Dariush in this fight, spoiler alert, very early. And the reason why I'm siding with Dariush is one of these fighters that's been so difficult to beat if you're predominantly a wrestler and a grappler, because his MMA wrestling is very, very good, and it's improved like rapidly over the years that he's been in the UFC, but he's also a very high level BJJ black belt, and I feel that gets undersold every single time he fights. Like, he is a high level BJJ black belt, and the only two fighters, at least recently, that have ever really got at him from that wrestling and grappling perspective is Arman Tsarukyan. Even though, actually, having said that, he was knocked out in the first round, I just think that Arman Tsarukyan would have got at him from a wrestling and grappling perspective. But then Charles Oliveira is Charles Oliveira. Like, he's one of the best submission grapplers that the UFC have ever had. Arguably the best if you look at how many submission wins and finishes that he's got in his UFC career. So those are the only two that have got the better of him or would have got. But, like, there's been so many different types of fighters with a similar style to Benoit Saint-Denis that have come against Dariush and just absolutely not being able to get at him. The first one that comes to mind is Diego Ferreira. Now, bear in mind, Diego Ferreira is like a 3rd or 4th degree BJJ black belt, and Dariush he was just dominant from that grappling perspective. And where I thought we were going to see a lot of back and forth, Dariush on his back a little bit, Ferreira on his back a little bit, like Dariush just controlled Ferreira in those positions on the mat, and that was Diego Ferreira that was actually, you know, closer, you know, very, very close to his prime as well. Tony Ferguson was another one. Now, Tony Ferguson a little bit different. He was past his prime, but still like a legit grappler. Then the one that comes to mind that is the reason why I've kind of gone the way with Dariush here is Mateusz Gamrot. So Gamrot for me is a better version of Benoit Saint-Denis. I've said it for years. I'd love to see both of those two fight. Like, that would be an insane fight, and one that that's just got to be made. I'm not sure how they've avoided each other for this long, but the UFC have, like I say, I'd love that fight to be matched. But again, Gamrot has got that pressure wrestling, overwhelming pressure wrestling, in your face, shooting takedowns, relentless, good grappling to go with it as well. Like, again, those that listen to this podcast and have done for a number of years, you know how I feel about Mateusz Gamrot. I think he's easily one of my favourite fighters with his style and how good he is. And again, when he went up against Beneil Dariush, he struggled. He couldn't really get Dariush down as much as what he wanted to, and the moments that he was close, Dariush was back up to his feet. And I just feel the same thing is going to happen with Benoit Saint-Denis here. I think Saint-Denis is going to come out. I think he's going to try and shoot a load of takedowns. I think Dariush is going to either defend him, get taken down, and stand right back up. I just don't see how Saint-Denis is going to control Beneil Dariush on the mat to the point where he's winning the minutes and the rounds because of it. If Gamrot struggled to do it, if Ferreira struggled to do it, I just don't think that Saint-Denis is going to be able to do it. I think even the argument of, okay, well, the engine on Saint-Denis, you know, is that overwhelming pressure and pace going to get at him the longer that fights go on? Like, did it with Gamrot? No. Like, did it with Ferreira? No. Benoit Saint-Denis, I think he will put a pace and pressure, but when it comes to a fighter, you know, being a little bit depleted first, the gas tank emptying first, I think Saint-Denis is going to be the one that the gas tank starts running on empty before Dariush. And I actually think that we're going to see a little bit something similar to what happened with Saint-Denis and Dustin Poirier. Again, I was on Dustin Poirier in that fight. I think I got him at like plus 170, plus 175, something crazy like that. And I said the same thing there. Benoit Saint-Denis might have some early success, but the opponent, I think, will defend takedowns, will be able to get back up to the feet, and eventually, you know, after a tough, you know, first maybe round or round and a half, I think Saint-Denis will fade because of the work rate and the pace that he's putting on. And then the experienced vet, in that case Dustin Poirier, in this case Beneil Dariush, will end up being able to turn the tide and get in a tired and depleted Benoit Saint-Denis. And I think the same thing is going to happen in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Beneil Dariush to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a phenomenal fight. I just don't see how any MMA fan can not love this fight. I kind of can't go as far as saying it's the best fight on the card because we've got two absolutely legitimate title fights at the top of the card. But if you take away the main and the co-main event, the championship fights, for me, this is the best fight on the entire card by a million miles. We've got Sean Brady versus Michael Morales. Now, what makes this super interesting is Brady's finally hit his prime. He's finally in his peak. He had some very on and off performances, you know, whilst he was making his way up to this position. I genuinely think the shutout of Leon Edwards is better than what a lot of people are going to give him credit for. I think people will say, oh, well, Edwards has declined and he's past it, which we've just covered. Like, I don't think he is. I just think Sean Brady's just that good. Now, Sean Brady's a legitimate black belt under Daniel Gracie. I think out of all that team of Daniel Gracie, like, again, your Sean Brady, your Pat Sabatini, Andrei Petroski's in there. Then you've got the likes of Nur Sultan, Ruzi Boyev, Jeremiah Wells. You've got all these legitimate grapplers under Daniel Gracie. Sean Brady's the one. He's the one that's the best, from, you know, a solid wrestling base into his absolutely elite grappling game. The striking's been getting better for Sean Brady as well. even if it's just to strike, to get into, good takedown entries to get his opponent down to the mat. And then on top, Brady's this ridiculously heavy blanket. What makes Brady so good from a grappling perspective is he knows when to lay heavy and when to float. So when his opponent is doing good work on bottom and looking for, to improve positions, or maybe to sneak out, to escape, to sweep, reverse, stand up, whatever it is, Brady's IQ level on the mat is second to none. And when he starts noticing fighters that are trying to escape, Brady can then change from laying heavy to floating. And when he starts floating and becoming a little bit lighter, it allows his opponents to move. But what it also allows him to do is block transitions or better his own positions that may, get a more advantageous position himself due to the movements that his opponent's making underneath him. And having that ability to lay heavy and control a position and to float when you need to, and you're at that high level black belt jiu-jitsu level, man, like, Brady's going to be so hard to beat once the wrestling and grappling starts in fights. Now, Michael Morales on the other side, I actually don't think Morales is in his prime yet. I think he's getting there, and I think he's an absolute monster. I think he's super dangerous. This is an amazing fight for a reason. Like, I've just spent a couple of minutes on Sean Brady there talking about how good he is and how elite he is. But I am saying this fight is an amazing fight because, it takes two amazing fighters to make a great fight. And Michael Morales is the other half of that great fight. He's a slick boxer. He's got power. Again, youthful energy. He's fast on the feet. Puts combinations together well. He can wrestle and grapple himself, but he just prefers to stay on the feet and knock people out. He is more predominantly a striker than he is a wrestler or grappler. And I think what makes this fight amazing is the fact that you've got Sean Brady that's absolutely going to want to get this fight down to the mat. That's going to be his MO. But then on the flip side with Michael Morales, he's absolutely not going to want to go to the mat. He's going to want to try and keep this fight stood up and knock Sean Brady out because that's his path to victory. So it's which fighter is going to activate the game plan and therefore activate the path to victory. Because if we get takedowns in this fight, Sean Brady wins it. If we don't get takedowns in this fight, then Michael Morales wins it. So it's a super intriguing fight stylistically. But again, it's one of those where it's kind of quite simple because you've just got to ask yourself that simple question. Does Sean Brady get takedowns in this fight? I think Brady might need 2 or 3. And the reason I'm saying 2 or 3 is I don't mean 3 rounds. I think he just needs to be able to get takedowns in 2 rounds out of the 3 without getting knocked out, of course. But again, I don't think Morales is going to come in and overexert himself and put a massive pace and pressure on Brady, because essentially what he's going to be doing is closing the distance for Brady. Now, Morales does operate more of a boxer, an MMA boxer in that boxing range. So he's got to enter smartly. If he just comes in and just starts pouring a load of pressure on Brady, I don't think Brady's gonna go on the back foot. I think Brady will use that distance closing to be able to shoot a takedown and take Morales down. So that's something Morales has got to be careful of. But like I say, the reason I'm saying 2 or 3 takedowns is I think early in this fight, while Morales is fresh, Brady might get a takedown, Morales might get back up. That's your 1 takedown. But I think the second takedown Brady gets on Morales in that first round, again, if it plays out like that, I think he keeps him down and does good work. And I'm not quite sure Brady gets Morales out of there. I think Morales will be tough enough to stay in the fight, at least early on. But then in the second round, I think, does Brady get a takedown? If he does get a takedown, I think he keeps him down again. That might be where there's a finish. If there is a finish, I think if Brady finishes Morales on the mat, whether it be a ground and pound or a submission, I don't think it'll be early. I think Morales is good enough to survive early here. I think it would be more late in the fight. But even if Morales steals around at some point throughout the fight, which, if it goes to a decision, I'm assuming it's not going to be a 30-27. I think Morales will steal around somewhere if it goes to a decision. But I just feel that Brady, again, the simple question is, does Brady get takedowns in this fight? I think he does. And for that reason, that's why I do think Brady wins the fight. Like I say, it's an amazing fight. It's not going to shock me. Again, I say this all the time. If I don't watch the fight and I wake up in the morning and I look at Topology and see that Morales has won, maybe he's won by knockout, I'm not going to be surprised. But I think for 2 fighters that have got years left in them, that are going to be at the top of the division, both of them for a number of years from this point. I just think it's Brady's time now. I think he's the one that's more in his prime. I think he's the one that's got a very dominant style, a style that Michael Morales probably hasn't dealt with and felt before. And look, maybe Brady hasn't dealt with a striker as good as and as talented as Morales either, but you know, I do think Brady's going to get the takedowns. I think he's been fighting the better level of competition. I think it's more his time right here, right now. And I think he's the fighter that's in his prime right now as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Sean Brady to win this fight. And in the next fight, talking of wrestling and grappling, we've got two ladies that do it very well. We've got Erin Blanchfield versus Tracy Cortez. Now, again, like I mentioned in the Valentina Shevchenko and Weili Zhang fight, I'm always a week in front in advance of my tape study, my research, and my, putting together my analysis. And again, at the end of last week, I looked at Erin Blanchfield. She was like a minus 160 favourite, and I'm thinking, okay, well, there's some value there. Like, maybe not a great deal, but there's value there. I like Blanchfield in this fight. But then looking at the betting lines this morning, man, like, all that money's coming on Blanchfield. She's up at minus 240 in some spots, and I just feel that that's gone too far. Like, Tracy Cortez is a good wrestler and a grappler herself. It's just, she's predominantly a wrestler and a grappler, and so is Erin Blanchfield. So it is, is there an obvious difference in the skill set between the two women? Is one of them clearly a better wrestler and grappler, or is one a better wrestler and the other one a better grappler? And you kind of do have a little bit of that. So I think that Cortez is slightly the better MMA wrestler, but I don't think it's by a great deal. Like, Blanchfield can still get fights down to the mat. Cortez is probably more, traditional wrestling, single legs, double legs, chain wrestling against the cage, whereas Blanchfield is more non-traditional with a takedown. So it's more body locks, trips, getting down to the mat that way. But where there is a big difference, in my opinion, is the grappling. Now, Cortez is a good grappler. Like, I'm not going to take that away and sort of make any incorrect statements regarding that. Like, Tracy Cortez is a very good grappler, and she dominates most of her fights via the grappling. But Blanchfield's a different level on the mat. Blanchfield, from a pure jiu-jitsu perspective, is, in my opinion, a level above Tracy Cortez, and that's not saying anything bad about Cortez. That's just, recognizing that Blanchfield is elite in that aspect. So even if Cortez is the better takedown artist in this fight and gets the fight down to the mat, I think Blanchfield will be absolutely fine. I think she'll be able to reverse positions, maybe stand up and get a trip herself, whilst they're close and the clinch it, they're ongoing with the clinch. Maybe she gets her own takedowns and gets on top of Cortez. So I don't think that Cortez's best plan of action here is her usual game plan in regards to taking Blanchfield down. So, how does Cortez do from a striking perspective? Well, both women are predominantly wrestlers and grapplers, so they don't thrive as much in the striking as they do with the wrestling and grappling. But even from a striking perspective, they've both developed and improved along the way, and that's perfect for them because it does aid the takedown game. But I think Blanchfield is the better striker. Now, she maybe wasn't a few years ago, but that striking has developed quite a lot to the point where Blanchfield can be somewhat competitive with predominant strikers, whereas I'm sure Cortez can be competitive as well. But again, when you're comparing the two skill sets, I just feel Blanchfield is going to be the better put together striker here. So this is kind of why I'm not surprised that the betting line has widened and all that money's coming on Blanchfield, because when you do break the fight down between the two women, you've got Blanchfield, in my opinion, that's the better striker. You've got Blanchfield that, in my opinion, is a level above Cortez from a grappling perspective. And then the wrestling's super close, but again, it's not so close that Blanchfield can't get takedowns. But if she can't get takedowns, I still think she's the better striker. But then, even if she's not the better wrestler and Cortez is the one that gets the takedowns, then Blanchfield is going to be better on the ground. So I kind of think that Cortez is really stuck in this fight of how she's going to win. And it is like one of these stylistic nightmares, because Cortez normally does need to get takedowns and grappling to win the fight, but I think she's going to be outmatched grappling, and does she really want to get the takedowns? And then on the feet, I think that Blanchfield's the better striker. So yeah, I kind of feel like Cortez is stuck a little bit. So for those reasons, I'm picking Erin Blanchfield to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Baisangur Susukaev versus Eric McConico. So Susukaev is the biggest favourite on the card. He's like minus 800 at most places. I would imagine the longer that fight week goes on, the more that's going to grow. It'll be parlay money, so it'll be people throwing Susukaev in every single parlay that they're putting on. And it's one of them, in my opinion, where, you know, you look at long-term gamblers, I don't think there's any value in minus 800. That super volatile line. You're not really going to get too much bang for your buck. But from your fun gamblers, yeah, he's absolutely a parlay piece, and I feel like that's what's going to end up turning him into like minus 1,000, minus 1,200. I do think the price is going to rise, and yeah, I kind of agree with the steam and with the line on Susukaev. I think it's a horrific fight for Eric McConico. I don't think McConico is actually a bad fighter, like from the MMA lab. You know that those guys with Benson Anderson and co always get the fighters ready and prepared, and they seem to be good everywhere, good strikers, wrestlers, grapplers. But there is levels in this sport, and I think McConico, I'm sure he's 35 years old, you know, made a late start to his UFC career. He hasn't looked overly like outstanding since he's come into the UFC. He's got a win in the UFC, so he's a UFC caliber fighter. He got a win against Cody Brundage as well, who's been in the UFC a while, so you can't say that he's not UFC caliber. But Susukaev's so good, he's so dangerous, like youthful as well. I think he's more well-rounded. You know, from a striking perspective, he's super dangerous with his kicks, knees, punches, elbows. He's very well put together from a striking side, and like I say, super dangerous, and he is a finisher as well. And then in his last fight, in his UFC debut, he won by submission, so now he's got a submission on his record. And bear in mind, I'm pretty sure he took that first UFC fight, his UFC debut, the Saturday after he won in the Contender Series, which of course is the Tuesday night. So I'm sure he got a UFC contract in the Contender Series on the Tuesday, and then fought again on the Saturday night in his UFC debut, which is absolutely mental. I'm not sure that's ever been done before as well, from, you know, jumping from a Tuesday Contender Series fight to a UFC fight on Saturday, on the following Saturday night. So the guy's got stones and delivers as well, even in very tough circumstances. Because again, what people don't realize is that's 2 weight cuts in a week. Like at this level, in, you know, fighting world class fighters, like Susukaev's definitely fun, definitely one to keep an eye on. But I think he hurts McConico here. I think even if McConico tries to wrestle and grapple him, he might get at him, maybe get a takedown briefly. But I think Susukaev won't get sort of like smothered by him. I think he could get back up to his feet, or will get back up to his feet if he does get taken down. But I think on the feet, he's just going to be firing at McConico, body, head, body, mixing it up, chopping him down, chewing him up a little bit. And I think Susukaev's going to have another statement performance. So for those reasons, I'm picking Baisangur Susukaev to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got Angela Hill versus Fatima Kline. Now, Fatima Kline is a fighter that I like a lot. I think she is going to be one definitely that people need to keep an eye on for the future. Like her Muay Thai is good, her grappling is like next level. The wrestling, I think, probably does need a little bit of work to catch up to the grappling. I'm not saying she's a bad wrestler. I'm just saying when she comes against wrestlers, then that's when she's going to be stuck, especially when she needs to activate the grappling. So yeah, for me, Fatima Kline is a fighter that I like a lot, and I think that because she's still young, she's going to have a successful time in the UFC. It still feels though that even though her skill set is solid, when it's put together under the brightest lights in the UFC, I still feel that there's development needed for Kline to start dominating fights. But that will be coming, and will be coming fight by fight. Like, she's definitely at a stage, like a developmental stage in her career where, you know, she is going to be improving rapidly from fight to fight. But again, I just want to make it clear that normally fighters that I say this about are still quite green. I don't think she's green with her skill set. Like, her Thai is good, her jiu-jitsu is phenomenal. Like, she's a very, very good fighter. It's just at this level, putting it all together under the brightest lights, she just needs to gain some experience, and she's not had easy fights. Like, I'm sure her UFC debut was against Jasmine Jasvidisius, which, again, you know, that's a rough UFC debut. And now, look who she's fighting now, Angela Hill. And yes, Kline's a minus 400, minus 450 favourite. I think that line flatters Kline, if I'm being honest. I don't think that she covers that betting line. But Angela Hill's like an experienced vet, striker herself. You know, she can wrestle and grapple. She's been in there against the best of the best for years and years in the UFC. And yes, she's getting up there in age. So yes, Kline's going to have, a massive, age gap here, youthful energy that goes into that. But Hill's got a massive experience edge. And that's the reason why the minus 450 line, I don't think is overly appealing. Maybe Kline does make the right improvements in this fight though and come out and absolutely dominate. And this is the reason why I've got to pick Kline, because if it is a close and competitive fight, man, I mean, look, Angela Hill has sneaked out some split decision wins in a time, but if it is a close and competitive fight, then Kline has got a chance of winning the fight in a close and competitive fight. But if one of these women absolutely dominate here, I don't think it's Angela Hill that dominates. I'd be shocked to see like a 30-27 over Fatima Kline. I think if any fighter dominates, it's going to be Kline. But even a close and competitive fight, Kline could still win as well. And that's the reason why you have to edge it. Angela Hill has had issues in the past with from a grappling perspective. I do think that's Kline's best aspect of a fight. She's a very legitimate BJJ player. So I think on the mat, she's going to have an advantage over Hill. On the feet, I think Hill can be tricky, but again, Kline's dangerous as well. She's got power. So I think she might be, she might be one of the first fighters that are going to have a clear speed and movement advantage over Hill. But again, I think Hill's age plays into that as well. So yeah, for me, it's a fight that I don't think Kline covers a betting line, but I do think she wins. For those reasons, I'm picking Fatima Kline to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Gerald Meerschaert versus Kyle Daukaus. Now, at this point, I'm pretty sure I said it on Meerschaert's last fight as well. He's just an auto fighter when it comes to a UFC pay-per-view. Like, it just seems every pay-per-view event's got Gerald Meerschaert on it. And he deserves it. He's a fighter that's super experienced, that win or loss, he always puts everything into his fight. He's a kill or be killed type of fighter. He doesn't quit. He doesn't back down from a challenge. I'm sure he's absolutely a matchmaker's dream for Meerschaert. He's one of those that I just don't think will ever cause any problems when it comes to, will you fight this fighter? And you shouldn't be saying no to fights in the UFC when the matchmakers put the matches together. It should be a fight that gets made. But Meerschaert for me is a fighter that I just, it's almost like Maynard knows that, yes, he's coming back from his management before he even sends the message or the email. So, yeah, Meerschaert's quality. I really like Meerschaert. Now, Kyle Daukaus, on the other hand, what a statement win last time out. He gets cut from the UFC. He goes on a win streak. He comes back into the UFC, and then he fights Michel Pereira, who is an absolute dangerous striker, like a real dangerous striker. Power as well, big for the division, and you're thinking, man, Daukaus has got to get a takedown. He's got to get Michel Pereira on his back, get him down early, wrestle him early, tire him out, empty that gas tank as much as you can. That's going to be the best chance that you've got of winning this fight. What does Daukaus do? Comes in the fight, exchanges from a striking perspective, and knocks Michel Pereira out bad. And look, how many times have we seen this happen? How many times have we seen a fighter get cut from the UFC, go on a win streak outside the UFC, come back and just look completely and utterly different, revived and just dangerous? It happened with Yusuf Zalal. Zalal wasn't a fighter many people, would tip the cap to being one of the best fighters in the division the first time round, and he gets cut from the UFC. But then he goes on a win streak, comes back, and man, he's absolutely dominating. And then look at Joseph Morales. Morales, same thing. Comes into the UFC, not really too much about him, gets cut, goes on a win streak, comes back into the UFC via the Ultimate Fighter, and he's now dominating again. And I just feel the same thing is going to happen with Daukaus. Now, what's going to save Daukaus in this fight that other opponents and fighters fall short with Meerschaert to is by not being on Meerschaert's level from a grappling perspective. And Daukaus, that's his predominant style. Daukaus is predominantly a grappler. So I don't think Meerschaert's going to have a ton of success against Daukaus if he gets him down. And that's where Meerschaert's problem's going to be, because Meerschaert can sneak wins out when he's the better grappler. He'll get beat up a little bit from the feet. His opponent might get a little bit tired, but that opponent also, hasn't got him out being a predominant striker, and then Meerschaert gets the takedown and then starts dominating from the grappling perspective. So with Daukaus, it's different. And Daukaus has clearly shown that his striking's leveled up because he's just knocked out Michel Pereira. If he's knocked out Pereira, I think he can knock out Meerschaert. And then I don't think Daukaus is the type of fighter that's going to succumb to Meerschaert's grappling, because that's where Daukaus is actually best himself. So I think Daukaus is going to be the better striker. I think it's going to cause Meerschaert some hesitancy. If Meerschaert does get into takedowns, I think Daukaus might be able to defend him, or if he is taken down, I think he'll get back up to his feet. I think that'll demoralise Meerschaert to the point where Meerschaert's thinking, well, I'm getting beat on the feet, I'm getting hit with some hard shots, I'm getting chewed up a little bit, I can't take this guy down, and when I do take him down, he gets right back up, like, what do I do? And I think once that realisation kicks in inside the cage, I think, it's Daukaus' fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Kyle Daukaus to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Bo Nickal versus Rodolfo Vieira. And again, I think this is a stylistic nightmare for Rodolfo Vieira. Like, Vieira's a fighter that needs to get fights down to the mat. Similar to Meerschaert. Meerschaert can strike, I'm not going to cover Meerschaert again, but, Rodolfo Vieira can strike. But again, it's just a means to getting fights down to the mat. But the problem that he's got here with Bo Nickal is to get fights down to the mat, you need to wrestle somebody down to the mat. And Bo Nickal is an elite level wrestler. And he's a striker that's got power as well. Like, I do think Bo Nickal's still a work in progress. I definitely think that he got to the UFC a little bit too soon, a little bit, I wouldn't say overhyped, because he's like an elite level wrestler. I don't think you can overhype somebody that's that good in a specific discipline in mixed martial arts or in a martial art. But I definitely think that it would have suited him to have more experience outside of the UFC. It's just the issue for someone like Bo Nickal, and I see this day in, day out with the other roles that I play within the sport, is he's just not going to be able to get fights outside of the UFC, because people will say no, and if they don't know him, as soon as they put a Google search into... put his name into a Google search, it's going to come up of how elite he is wrestling, and then they're going to pull out of a fight or not say yes. So it kind of, it was kind of been rough for Nickal, because he won't have been able to get good fights outside the UFC, because nobody will want to take a loss to him whilst they're trying to get on their journey to the UFC. And then, you get rushed to the UFC too soon, and the level is just ridiculous at the UFC, and you're just not being able to flourish. So he's kind of learning on the job. But here against Rodolfo Vieira, it's very clear. Vieira needs to get this fight down to the mat. He needs to settle Bo Nickal shoulders to shoulder on the mat to do good work. I think if Rodolfo Vieira is in a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think he gets hurt. I think he probably gets knocked out. And yeah, he's got to get him down. But to do that, you've got to take one of the world's best MMA, one of the best wrestlers on the planet that's transitioned to MMA. You've got to be able to take that fighter down to be able to do your good work. That's where it's a stylistic nightmare. I don't think Vieira's going to have much success trying to get Nickal down, unless it's a clinch and then, he tries to trip from a clinch or tries to maybe use some judo. But even still, like, the wrestling's going to activate in those moments, especially like in the clinch. And I just don't think Nickal's going to be able to get got at. And if Vieira is trying to rush into these close positions to take him down, I think Nickal's going to be able to land some good elbows, some good knees, some good big punches, looping punches on Vieira, whose striking defense isn't the best. Yeah, I think it's a tough night for Vieira. For those reasons, I'm picking Bo Nickal to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun one here. We've got Roman Kopylov versus Gregory Rodrigues. Now, I really wanted to get behind Kopylov as the underdog here, and that's nothing against Rodrigues. I just like to hunt underdogs first and foremost until I can figure out a reason through my tape study, my research and analysis of a reason why I can't bet the underdog. And look, from Gregory Rodrigues' perspective, I love Rodrigues. He's a super fun fighter. He's absolutely huge for the division. Nickname RoboCop. How can you not enjoy that? But like, on a serious note, he's got good boxing, good power in his hands. He's a Brazilian wrestling champion, national champion. He's a super high-level jiu-jitsu fighter. Like, Rodrigues has got it all. Now, he did fall short against Jared Cannonier, but that was his fight against a top 5 guy that eventually he was going to get that fight, but it was one of those, in my opinion, those veteran losses. And I know Rodrigues has lost before. Like, he took a split decision loss to Armen Petrosian, which arguably he should have won. And coincidentally, actually, with that Petrosian fight, Petrosian is a high-level kickboxer, and Kopylov is a very similar style. And I know Rodrigues fell short in that fight, but again, arguably he should have won, but he did do good work. And Rodrigues is leveled up like astronomically between that Petrosian fight and where he is right now. Anyway, coming back to the Cannonier fight, like, it was just a veteran loss for him. He was going to step up in competition, and it happens, happens from time to time. You take that step up, you fall short, and you come back stronger. And then he came back and knocked out Jack Hermansson in the first round. Now, again, you can argue Jack Hermansson might not be what he used to be, but Hermansson and Jared Cannonier are very much close within where they're at in the UFC. Yes, Cannonier's better, in my opinion, but it's not like a million miles apart. So Rodrigues, in my opinion, has took that loss that was a veteran loss, and now he's coming back better. But I just don't think Kopylov's on that level of a Jared Cannonier. Look, Rodrigues looked great early in that Cannonier fight, but just faded the longer the fight went on. It was a rough experience for him. But Kopylov, again, you might be able to argue Kopylov's just come off that experience loss. He's just fought Paulo Costa, Borrachina, and didn't get the win. But again, I just don't think Paulo Costa is... I don't know. Paulo Costa's a weird one. I can't really explain it, but I think if Gregory Rodrigues went in there against Paulo Costa right now, I think Rodrigues beats him. Like, I won't say comfortably, but again, you avoid the power of Costa, and Rodrigues is a way better fighter from a skill set perspective. But maybe Kopylov's just took that experience loss, but Kopylov's also took a couple of losses as well. Like, he was dominated on the mat by Fluffy Hernandez, which I know Fluffy Hernandez is absolutely on a heater. He's elite and very difficult to beat right now. But Rodrigues has also got insanely good grappling, especially MMA grappling. The bridge between jiu-jitsu and MMA has worked for him. So I'm just looking at this fight and where it plays out. If it ends up playing out from a wrestling and grappling perspective, I think Rodrigues gets at Kopylov. I think he probably gets him out of there, ground and pound or a submission. I think there's a big difference in level and quality from the wrestling and grappling perspective here. Striking wise, Kopylov's probably the more technical striker, but Rodrigues has got power and is efficient in what he throws. So if it's a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think we're probably going to see another split decision. Like, that kind of is where I'm at. I think it could be that close, where either one of them decisively win a round each, and then another round is super close, making it a close decision, or all 3 rounds are really close, if it's a striking fight. But I think Rodrigues is going to mix up his wrestling and grappling. I like his fight IQ. I don't think there's any way that Rodrigues and his team aren't coming into this fight thinking, right, okay, I think they'll be happy to strike with him early on just to get a feel of everything and make Kopylov think that the wrestling and grappling isn't coming. But I just don't think there's any way that wrestling and grappling is not in your game plan when you're fighting a predominant striker that's been got at from a wrestling and grappling perspective before. So, yeah, look, stylistically, I think the fight favours Rodrigues. I think the biggest gap in skill is within the grappling, so for those reasons, I'm picking Gregory Rodrigues to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Malcolm Wellmaker versus Cody Haddon. Now, Malcolm Wellmaker might be the most hyped UFC fighter right now, 10-0, got the touch of death, knocking absolutely everybody out, and he's one of these fighters that, you might be watching a fight thinking, okay, well, his opponent's doing well against him. But whilst that's happening, Wellmaker's making reads. He's downloading the data. And I even said this before breaking down his last fight, that he can fall behind for the first couple of minutes a little bit. Whilst his opponent gets to work, Wellmaker's just being patient. But whilst he's being patient, he's making all the reads to bring his timing and accuracy together at the same time, coupled with his power and his elite level technical kickboxing. And once all those come together after the 2 minutes, he's got elite level kickboxing with power in his hands. Now he's just got his timing down. Now his accuracy is going to be up there because of the timing. And it's just a recipe for a knockout. And that is the reason why he's knocking everybody out. And Cody Haddon's a good boxer himself. And he's a good grappler. Like he's a more well-rounded fighter than Wellmaker, in my opinion, because of the wrestling and grappling. But Wellmaker's defense, at least at this level, we know is good enough to keep fights standing. Once Wellmaker starts hitting the top 15, that's when we can maybe start asking some questions of, right, now are the knockouts going to happen against the best fighters in the division? And if they don't happen, and these best fighters start trying to look for different ways to beat Wellmaker, to take him down, to grapple him, is Wellmaker gonna stand up to that? But that's a conversation for a different day, because this is not a top 15 fight. Cody Haddon isn't a ranked fighter. This is the exact type of level within the UFC that Wellmaker is just deading people, man. Like, again, it's tough because Cody Haddon is good. And actually, if you look at the betting line right now at the time of recording, there is a massive respect for Cody Haddon on the betting line. Yes, he's the underdog, but he's only a slight underdog. Like Malcolm Wellmaker's minus 128 as I'm looking at one of the bookies. But bear in mind here, right, there's so much respect on Cody Haddon because I thought this line would be a lot wider. But you've got to understand that only 2 bookies, at least what I'm seeing, have got betting lines up here. Once this starts coming across all the bookies and all the, the casinos and the bookmakers in Vegas, once they've all got lines and it's available for everybody to bet, I think the limits are going to start getting lifted. I think the money's going to pump in on Wellmaker, and I think Wellmaker will come into this fight like minus 300 or maybe more. Like the hype's there on Wellmaker. It's there enough that, you're looking at minus 128, and I just don't see how that doesn't get steamed. I'd be shocked if Wellmaker was anything close to that betting line. So just bear that in mind. Just expect the line to move. Wellmaker might end up being more of a parlay piece than a straight bet once the fights actually go down on Saturday night. But again, I just feel like we're going to see a very similar fight. I think Haddon's going to come in at Wellmaker. I think he's going to bring the fight to Wellmaker. I think he's going to do some good work boxing. He's going to get hit a couple of times just from, like a piecing up perspective. Haddon's going to hit Wellmaker a few times from a piecing up perspective. I also don't see a scenario where Haddon doesn't try and shoot a takedown, especially early, because again, Haddon's not daft. His team are not daft. Like they're a world-class team. He's a world-class fighter. He's going to know what Wellmaker brings to the table, and he's not going to want to be stood up with Wellmaker for a long period of time. So I do think we're going to see Wellmaker's defensive wrestling and grappling get tested. I do think he's going to get taken down, but I think he's going to get right back up. And once he's got up, and Haddon's realised that he's going to be difficult to keep down, and by that point Haddon's already landed a few strikes and Wellmaker's starting to get his own reads on the timing, the distance, the accuracy, I think Wellmaker's going to land that punch that knocks him out. So for those reasons, I'm picking Malcolm Wellmaker to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is probably, again, you take away the 2 championship fights and you've got the Sean Brady, Michael Morales fight that in my opinion is the best fight on the card. This is probably the one that's straight after it. You've got Chepe Mariscal versus Pat Sabatini. What a fight this is. Like, Chepe Mariscal's on an absolute heater. He's got that dog in him, man. Like, he's not training with Justin Gaethje and that team anymore. At least it doesn't look like that from what I've seen on Instagram. Again, I had Instagram into my research and analysis. I always like to see what a fighter's doing, if they've changed teams, or if they're training with a certain training partner for a specific matchup. So I look at all angles. But very surprised that Chepe Mariscal, I'm not seeing him with Justin Gaethje and that team over there. Now, he looks like he's with Syndicate with Merab Dvalishvili, which is actually really interesting. And you look at this opponent in Pat Sabatini, it's probably a better training partner for Chepe Mariscal with Merab Dvalishvili for this specific opponent than it would be for Justin Gaethje. Or even having said, like, I don't even know if I can say that confidently thinking about it. Like, Justin Gaethje is about as elite as it comes. But yeah, Merab Dvalishvili is also super elite. But the reason why I don't hate it though is, whereas Gaethje can wrestle and he's got a phenomenal wrestling background, he is predominantly a striker inside the cage, whereas someone like Merab Dvalishvili is predominantly a wrestler, a grappler, a heavy pressure one as well, but an insanely good wrestler. And this is where Sabatini comes in, because Sabatini is an insanely good wrestler. And just like I mentioned with Sean Brady earlier on, like, Sabatini is another one of these fighters that is under Daniel Gracie, legitimate BJJ black belt under Daniel Gracie, wrestling background as well. And where I said that Sean Brady is the number 1 in that team, and I stand by that, I think Pat Sabatini is the number 2. So Sabatini is elite with his wrestling and grappling. Now, I just keep going back and forth on this fight. Like, I love Sabatini. I've cashed on him so many times. And the one time that I actually bet against him was the Damon Jackson fight. And Jackson beat him. So I'm actually quite successful betting Pat Sabatini fights, win or loss, right? But the reason why I like to sort of boast about that is because the bets that I've been winning on Sabatini are the ones where everyone's slating him and writing him off and like, oh, he's got no chance. Like that fight against Jonathan Pierce, every man and his dog was on Jonathan Pierce in that fight. And I knew what Sabatini was going to do to him. But the thing is, like, Jonathan Pierce had that dog in him, like Chepe Mariscal, had the wrestling in him, like Chepe Mariscal, had grappling in him, like Chepe Mariscal, was a forward pressure, overwhelming striker, like Chepe Mariscal. And Sabatini went in that fight and took away all that hype, everything that Jonathan Pierce was doing to everybody else, and just completely nullified him. The wrestling and grappling on Pat Sabatini is no joke. But on the flip side, Chepe Mariscal, I feel like he's a better dog and well put together dog than Jonathan Pierce. Like, I think Mariscal, whereas Jonathan Pierce did accept some forward pressure and some overwhelming pressure on him from Sabatini, I just got a feeling Mariscal might just stand in the middle and be like, okay, Sabatini, you want to come forward? Let's come forward. But what's going to happen when you come forward? I'm going to land on you. And it's hard low kicks, it's hard punches. He's got deceptive power. He's got good cardio. If he is taken down, he's not he's not a fish out of water on his back. He can get back up to his feet. I just keep going backwards and forwards because Sabatini can get got at by opponents that have got power that can land on him, especially whilst he's coming forwards. And Sabatini does thrive on because his skill set's so good. From a wrestling and grappling perspective, fighters tend to just be a little bit hesitant and take those backward steps, which allows Sabatini to come forwards and shoot his takedowns and get fights down to the mat. But whereas those fighters are taking backward steps, I think Mariscal will just be like, well, let's go. You want to come forward? Let's see what happens when you come forward. He's got that type of attitude, that dog attitude. And if he doesn't take a backward step, I worry for Sabatini because Damon Jackson didn't take a backward step. He met fire with fire in the middle, hurt Sabatini and put him out. And that's another thing. Sabatini, for as good as he is wrestling and grappling, he does have some question marks on him from a durability perspective. And Chepe Mariscal's got the power and the nastiness in him to be able to put Sabatini out. But then on the flip side, Sabatini's wrestling and grappling so good. So it's like, I'm just torn. And again, I know I've said it a few times, I'm always a week in advance with my tape study, my research, my analysis. And when I looked at the end of last week, this was a straight pick'em. So I was just like, well, how can I make that decision on the podcast of who I'm going to pick when it's a straight pick'em and I'm flipping between the two? So I was hoping some money came in on one side to make the pick'em prediction very easy in a close fight that could go a million different ways for me to just side with the underdog. And that's what happened. The money came in on Pat Sabatini. I don't hate it. Like, I could have got it both sides. The money came in on Sabatini, but it makes the pick very easy. For a betting podcast where everything's super close and a fight can go a million different ways, I'm going to side with the underdog. I'm picking against my better nature. Like, I hate doing this because I really do like Sabatini, but I'm picking Chepe Mariscal to win this fight. And finally, the last fight to break down. This fight actually only got added about 48 hours ago. Very strange. Obviously, both fighters will have known about it for a couple of weeks. You know, what we see on the media when fights get announced, or if a fighter pulls out injured, the UFC have already known this for between a week or two. So, yeah, still short notice for both guys. And we've got Vyacheslav Borshev versus Mateus Camilo. Now, Camilo was supposed to fight a couple of weeks ago, lost the opponent, and that's obviously why they've pushed for this fight. I'm assuming Borshev's team have just been on Shelby's case, give me a fight, give me a fight, give me a fight. And Camilo's like, oh, I've lost a fight and I don't want to waste a fight camp, give me a fight, give me a fight. So Shelby's probably just said, right, both of you, get out my way, stop messaging me, fight on this card. You know, kind of feel like that's the scenario here. But Mateus Camilo's an interesting one because when I first watched his tape, again, I wasn't super impressed, and I'm still not overly impressed because of how his first fight in the UFC ended. But what did surprise me, I thought Camilo was an out-and-out striker, but he had some good wrestling chops against Gabe Green, was getting takedowns, looked good, looked like a completely different fighter to what I watched on tape. So I'm thinking, holy shit, like Camilo is one of these fighters that you've not been sold on in tape, but come into the UFC and looks like a million miles better than anything you've seen before and looks like a totally different fighter. But then he got reversed in later in that fight against Gabe Green and then got submitted. So it kind of put, it was almost like this balloon had been blown up and you were like, holy shit, Camilo's good, and then bang, someone pops it. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting fight. Borshev, and a lifelong kickboxer, multiple hundred fights outside of MMA before he came into MMA. So yeah, Camilo's got to worry about that. Like, Borshev is a good striker and, he's got power as well. But the thing is, Borshev can also get got at from a striking perspective. You go back and look at the Chase Hooper fight that hurt Borshev. Borshev's been hurt a couple of times by fighters you wouldn't expect him to be hurt by because he's such an experienced kickboxer. So then you think, well, Camilo's predominantly a striker, so he should be able to hit Borshev. But now I've seen some wrestling and grappling from Camilo, and that's where Borshev's hole has always been in his MMA game. Once he fights a good MMA wrestler grappler, he just gets got at. So this is now the reason why I'm on the side of Camilo, because I think Camilo, I think if it's a straight 15-minute kickboxing fight, I do think Borshev wins, but I've seen Borshev hurt by predominant grapplers that aren't known for the striking. So having a fighter who is a predominant striker just makes me think Camilo could get at him. But then when you start adding the takedowns, the wrestling, the grappling into this fight, I just think Camilo's got more ways to win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Matheus Camilo to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. Gone on quite a while, actually, an hour and 14 minutes. I do apologise for those people that like this, in and around the hour mark or just underneath an hour. But yeah, I did have complaints also when I did a quickfire podcast that lasted 30 minutes. So yeah, I suppose you can't please everybody. But yeah, look, this fight card's phenomenal. And there was a number of fights that, I needed to spend a little bit of time on. Obviously, the main and the co-main event, the two title fights. But then Sean Brady, the Chepe Mariscal Sabatini fight. Like, there's a number of fights that, I felt like needed some extra time. So yeah, is what it is. But thank you for everybody tuning in. And if you're still here and listening at this point, I do appreciate you. If you're on one of the podcast platforms, if you're driving when you get back home, wherever you're listening, wherever you can spare 10 minutes, jump onto YouTube. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like the video, comment as well. It always helps the algorithms. I am very busy week in, week out with other roles that I do take on within the sport, but I always try my best to get back to the comments as and when I can. I know I did to a couple of people last week, so please leave a comment. Again, it all helps the algorithms, it all helps the channel grow. I give predictions. I'd spend my time giving predictions, breaking fights down on a podcast. So all I ask in return is, just jump onto YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like the video and comment, and let's get our channel out to as many people as possible. And one last time, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler. Our ethos is we want you to make your money back as quickly as you possibly can that you spend with us so you can start profiting on top of your bets. And the only way we can all achieve that is by the prices we set. Everything's super affordable at MMA Play 365. It's just $5 for one event, $10 a month, or $99 for an entire 12 months of betting, predictions, and advice. Again, super affordable, so you can make that money back as quickly as you possibly can and start profiting on top of your bets, which is what this is all about. So that's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.